So, yeah, so the easiest way of actually capturing the sales message is to record yourself using whatever recorder you have available, and just say what you'd actually say to a prospect who's calling up and asking you, asking you about the service that you're selling. And it's incredible how once you get that transcribed, you'll realize that the message that you said, that you speak out loud is so often much more straightforward and clear and in plain English compared with what you might have otherwise written on the page.
So regardless of your sales presentation skills or your fear of not being that good, that's the best way to do it.
Absolutely, yes. It's good even if you're a good writer. It often helps to actually just to realize what it is that you'd say in real life.
Perfect.
And then similarly, often so many people ask us how long a page should be, and one kind of maybe non-obvious answer is that you need to use on a web page. You need to use at least as many words as you'd use when selling face-to-face. And the reason for that is because when you're selling something face-to-face to someone, firstly, you might find it takes, some sales take, hours or days. So that's one thing, is people are often worried about having a long web page, forgetting that if they were selling this face-to-face, it might take a 2-hour presentation. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is that when you're selling face-to-face, you have the advantage that you can actually tailor the message depending on what questions and what responses the prospect makes. So when you're selling face-to-face, the prospect effectively has like a little choose-your-own-adventure style branching to the message. Whereas when you're on a web page, when you're writing on a web page, you have to anticipate all of the possible objections that the prospect will make, and then to write what your response would be to those objections. So for that reason, you have to, the page often ends up, not always, but often ends up much longer than most web pages are at the moment.
Karl, a lot of people, I'm sure you hear this as often as I do, someone will say, they look at a very, very long web page doing exactly what you recommend here, and they say, oh, I would never read anything that long. How do you respond to those folks?
Yeah, I think so often when they say that, it's because they are thinking with the eyes of a marketer rather than the eyes of a prospect. The reality is, when you carry out user tests with people who are genuinely interested in something, they do read a lot. They do, they have loads of questions. They do study the page. So I think that's what it is. It's more that the marketer is often much less interested in the product than the prospects are. And similarly, don't forget that people don't have to read everything. They're hunting around for the information that they need, so they don't necessarily read the whole page. They're often skim reading for whichever information they need.
Got it.
But we've got this a nice little phrase, which is also that it's not. Some people say, "Oh, long copy." People don't read long copy, but it's not about. It's not really about how long your copy is. It's about how boring it is. If your copy's boring, then they won't read it, regardless of what length it is.
Yeah, copy can never be too long, just too boring.
Yeah. But the next one is be concise, because again, people often misunderstand that when you say long copy, that you mean, a lot of words and a lot of fluff. But really, it needs to be also as concise as you can. So what we normally find is that once we've taken all the sales messages and communicated in the most concise way we can, it's still a long page. So you need a page with loads of extremely well explained, compact copy. So you need both length and concise.
Got it. Makes sense.
There's obviously being able to write is really important, and the plain English guides are really good in terms of write. There's the plain English campaign website. I've got some great PDFs, but this one I'm showing here is good as well. Professional writing style, which there's URLs at the bottom right there, designsensory.com/pdf. PWS, and that's got some fairly advanced tips on writing. Basically writing well, writing so people will actually read and understand what it is that you're saying. And it's a great little compilation that, preferring the active voice, I think most people know that, but things like denominalizing is really, it's surprising how many writers make the mistake of nominalizing, and it's something that, most writers don't even know what that means, whereas, once you read this guide, it's got some really good techniques for making your writing better.
Rather than keeping people on the edge of their seat there, why don't you explain the difference between those two?
Should I do that? Let's think of a sentence. A straightforward sentence would nominalizing is where you take a verb or an adjective or several verbs and you create like a new noun out of it. So let's say in this case, for this talk, this is a talk by Karl Blanks from conversion rate experts about how to increase the conversion rate of your website. Now, nominalizing that would be giving it a name in terms of, okay, let's call this the Karl Blanks conversion rate experts conversion rate increase website seminar. So just basically turning what's actually a sentence into one big noun. And there are lots of different forms of it, but it almost always ends up in something that's really quite hard to understand. So it's effectively inventing new nouns by stringing a sentence or a phrase into a noun.
Got it. And for more on that, people can go to Design Sensory, the URL they see right there.
Yes. I'd say when I'm editing other people's copy, that's one of the most common things that I do is unpick noun strings. So it's yes, actually, so unraveling adjective noun strings is number 5 as well. There's another kind of fiddly one there.
Mm-hmm.
But also with nominalizing is when it's taking a phrase like is actually making the subject of the sentence. Sorry, another thing on there. Making the subject of the sentence something that's like not really. I'm gonna have to challenge myself to find another example here, but where you say rather than you increase your conversion rate, conversion rate optimization is achieved by basically taking an impersonal item and turning that into the subject of the sentence. That's another really common.
Got it. We'll leave.
Mistake. But yeah, I should probably move on from these.
Yeah, we'll leave more of that to the grammarians. Yeah.
And leave people to the guide here. The next one that we do all the time is get someone to read out what you've just written. Someone who's not familiar with the subject, maybe not like a 2-year-old kid. This is my daughter here. But that's her with extreme revenue growth.
Yeah. One of her favorite books, by the way.
That was one of her favorite books. She actually took that down from the shelf, and I thought it was a nice choice. But yeah, getting someone else to read out what to you your own writing, and just notice where they slip up, and to notice where they clearly don't understand something, or where they, even if they pause during a sentence, you can learn loads. We do it with, I know this sounds over the top, but even every single one of our blog posts we do it with. We do it with all the copy that we ever create for clients. We get someone to read it out and listen to them saying it out loud. Listen to the bits where they stumble. Listen to the things that they don't understand. And it's incredible how effective it is. And it's incredible how few writers actually go to that effort to get things right. It's really, really useful.
Now, one of the things I do, Karl, I don't know if it's as effective, but I will, after I write my copy, I will read it out loud myself to catch where there are problems. I'm sure that's helpful, but not as effective as the other, correct?
I think so, yeah. I mean, yes, I'd say getting someone else to do it. And that sounds like a big deal, but it doesn't take as long as you'd think. Realistically, if you haven't got time to hear one person reading it out, before it gets published to however many people, 100,000 people or whatever, then it's kind of, it's false economy. But one thing that's good, Fred, is with with screen sharing, your GoToMeeting or whatever, or even Google Docs. It's nowadays really easy just to find someone, to call someone up and say, do you mind just spending 5 minutes to read this to me over the phone?
Yep.
So we do quite a lot of it. You'll find someone who's relevant, and then just use screen sharing to do it.
Perfect.
And ideally, someone who doesn't know the subject already, so they're kind of an independent reader. Right, what I'm going to do now is, obviously, there's no, as far as copywriting goes, there are loads of different, copywriting is complicated, obviously, and there are loads of different formulae and templates and things that you could use. But what I've put here is a few slides just giving a fairly neutral, safe bet copywriting template. So if someone's listening to this and if the listener's thinking, well, where do I start? What I've put together is a fairly safe template that most sales messages could fit into, and which would stand a very good chance of beating whichever control you've got there at the moment. So I'll just read through this now.
It's great. Let's take a look. Yep.
If we start from the top with open with a sentence that makes the reader say, "That's me." So a little flag sentence that says, so for example, if you were selling burglar alarms, you might open with a sentence saying, "Looking for a burglar alarm," or "Looking for an alarm for your apartment, home, or office," or something like that. Mm-hmm. So a sentence that just makes people realize that they're in the right place. And then a headline that makes them want to read more. I've been very general with this because there are so many different types of headline that are effective. But probably the most straightforward one is just a headline that mentions a few benefits of the product, or even just whatever you'd say to someone if you wanted to summarize what's great about the product all in one line. But I won't go into loads of detail on this talk about the headline because it's a whole subject on itself, and there are, I don't know how many different formulae there are for headlines, but there are lots. Next, a series of bullet points can come in really useful, which summarize the main benefits of the product and of reading further down the page. Make sure they're not too small, because the font size should step down like they're climbing into a jacuzzi of text. The graphical appearance should match the site's feel.
What an image, the jacuzzi of text.
But the big thing is, one thing you see, a mistake people often make, is that the layout of the text, especially at the top, should be that the reader reads the headline first, then often their eyes go up to read the sentence above.
Right.
And then they read the bullet points, and then they read what's beneath. And you don't want any one element like stealing the attention of the element above it. That's the worst thing, is if these bullet points are too small, then what we find in tests is that someone will skip from the headline down to, say, this next section, and they'll miss all the bullet points, which were actually your second most important element in the page. So mm-hmm. That's the most important. You want a layout that keeps control of the user's eye gaze, so that they read it in the order that you want them to read it in.
And Karl, you made a quick statement there that I'm curious about. Now, you've done extensive testing where you've got the eye heat maps to see where people are looking, right?
Yes, we've done. There's a few different things. I mean, the obvious one is eye tracking software, where the person sits in front of a special monitor and they use the site, and you can. I think I've got a screenshot actually of one that we did in a few slides' time. So there's that. Most people don't have access to that, and so like what's the what? Then you have to kind of ask what's the what do you do if you don't have access to $20,000 eye tracking kit? And what's surprisingly effective is to let the user read through the page in a user test. You watch them reading through it, and then at the end, or even after 10 seconds, ask them what they looked at. And even though it's not, even though it's not as accurate as actually being able to see what they looked at, they can tell you, most people can tell you what they looked at first and what they read and which bits they didn't look at. So That can be useful as well.
Now,
Again,
so are you
again,
also
it's not as
saying?
accurate, but it's
Sorry, are you
wise
also
notice.
saying that the results that are compiled generically are fairly indicative of what you and I would have happen to our sites?
Oh, sorry, I don't think I understood the question.
Meaning to
The
say, the results of the eye tests and tracking with a $20,000 machine, are those fairly standard, and we can think of those as we go through and sort of look at those as benchmarks of what we should be concentrating on and where?
um, the eye tracking heat maps from eye tracking kit do they you can learn by looking at them. You start to learn principles of what people look at and what people don't. But similarly, there's a limit to how much you can kind of extrapolate that into. People will always read this first, and then they'll always look here, because so many pages are, I suppose, complicated because of the layout and because of even how interesting the text looks, for example. So it's not. There's a limit to how much you can just extrapolate rules of thumb from the from eye tracking maps.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yep,
Is that what
it
you're
does.
meaning?
It does.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, yes. Next on this page is a Johnson box. A Johnson box is effectively it's a term we've taken from the world of direct mail, and the Johnson box is effectively a table of contents that's also it's more than a table of contents. It's a fascinating table of contents that summarises what people will see in each section and urges them to keep reading. And we find that on the web, a Johnson box is you can have a Johnson box saying what they'll get on this page, and then you can have links to the different sections. So the good thing about that is that even if someone doesn't want to read through the whole message, like I mentioned before, they can still skip to the parts that do interest them.
Got it.
Next, make the first sentence short, put it in bold too, and then using the inverted pyramid principle, so that the first paragraph contains an overview of the major points. So I should say use. You can put all the details further down, reveal the best bits now before the reader loses interest. And then finally, that was a transitional link, and finally is like a link that links sentences together. So phrases like that are very good at tying together the whole copy. We're into the normal body copy size, by which time they're more committed to reading. You have their attention, but you still need to make every single word work for you, so edit ruthlessly. Use subheads to announce and sell what's in each section. Subheads also break up the monotony and appeal to skim readers. Have sections that tick off each item in the prospect's mental shopping list. Remember, the purpose of this page is to persuade them of all the things they need to believe in order to buy from you. Support all your claims with evidence. A lot of advertising falls down on credibility, and the reader simply doesn't believe the advertiser's claims, so you need to weave proof into everything you say.
All makes sense.
Any thoughts, any comments on that before I skip to the next slide?
Not at all. Completely sensible.
Okay. Bullet points like this can be used to illustrate points or benefits. They can be easier to read if you put half of them in bold and the other half in regular, and it often helps to write them in the same way that you'd write a headline. So anything that you learn about writing headlines, you can use in the bullets. Then have the offer and the call to action. Summarize the benefits, present the offer or offers, and justify the price. And then finally, this is a good time to present risk reduction strategies such as the guarantee, the guarantee or anything else that reduces the risk to the prospect, and offer an incentive for prompt action at the end. So at the point where they're actually thinking, well, will I make a decision? Then that's the best time to offer an incentive for acting quickly, whether that's a special deal or a bonus or something, or any kind of scarcity that's intrinsic to the business. And one thing with all of this, and that's the end of the sales template, and one thing that's really worth keeping in mind here is I've kept it in Microsoft. This whole thing was just screenshot from Microsoft Word, and the reason for that is that we find it's really useful to create all of your copy in a format that's kind of independent of the actual layout of the page in the end. It's very hard to think about layout at the same time that you're actually crafting the sales message. And so if you create the sales message in Word and make it linear, then afterwards you can work out how to arrange these different elements on the page. But it's best just to think of, ideally, what would you like someone to read first? What would you like them to read next? What would you like them to read after that?
Yep.
And then only at the end do you then have to start thinking about, well, what's the best way to lay this out so they'll read the message in the order that I actually intended them to.
Sounds good to me. That works.
Great. Having said that, people still ask what the most important aspects are of their pages. What area should you focus on if you already have a page and you want to improve its conversion rate. So here are 5. The first one is the angle. A lot of people say that headlines are the most important part of a page, but it's not quite right. It's not. Actually, no, I'm spoiling part. I think it's one of the future points. The first point is the angle, which is if you think that if you're going to change a message, it's much more important to think, how would I, if I was selling this face to face, how would I come in at a different angle and sell this differently? So it's not about rewording or tweaking the way something's worded. It's actually coming in at a different angle from the whole sales message. Here's a great idea. The great example with the copywriter Robert Collier. He was selling lawn fertilizer, and if you think, well, most people would say, well, okay, then the best headline, the best angle of approach would be to explain the 3 biggest benefits of the lawn fertilizer. Now that might well work, and it's a safe formula. But Robert Collier, here's the opening of a direct mail letter that he wrote. He said, "Dear Sir or Madam, with your permission, I'm going to make an analysis of the soil of your lawn to determine at my own risk and expense what elements are lacking in it, what you need for stronger, healthier, more closely grown turf." So if you think of what he's doing there, he's not just kind of tweaking what the benefits are or slightly rewording it. He's coming in at a completely different angle, which is that I'm going to, with your permission, I'm going to carry out a free analysis of your soil to recommend what's missing. And if you think that's such a different way of selling it, that what we find is that's almost definitely going to give a different conversion rate, because he's going in with a completely different message. It's not how he's saying it that's different. It's what he's saying that's different. Mm-hmm. And so there's loads of different angles that you come up with. But just if you want to really beat your existing control, then you're never going to get a 50% or 100% improvement unless you can come up with a really significantly different angle, so the person's really getting a different message. So the obvious angle is just the main benefits and how they'll be reached with certainty and with ease. That's a very safe one. For inevitable high-risk sales, then we find that the better angle is to describe the perils of making a mistake. So if someone, for example, is shopping for a CRM system for their company, then an article about the 7 biggest mistakes people make when choosing a CRM system is much more likely to attract them than something that just says 3 major benefits of your own CRM. The next good thing to consider when you're looking for an angle is entering the conversation that's already going on in the prospect's mind. That was a quote from, I believe, Maxwell Sarkisian, the famous copywriter. And entering the conversation that's going on already on their mind is to think of what's their biggest question, what they're already thinking of when they arrive, and immediately addressing that. So it may be that they're arriving at your site thinking, how do I buy X, your type of product? So it's not. If they're thinking that, then the best way is to actually tell them how to buy X, how to go about buying it. If they're thinking, how do I choose between vendors, then you tell them how to choose between vendors and you show how you're better than the alternatives. If they're concerned about the risk, and that's the main thing that's going on in their mind, then to give the guarantee and to state your guarantee so immediately up front to reduce that risk. If they are interested in the offer, they've already decided to make a decision, and it's more about, what do I get, then again, featuring the offer in the headline and up front is often a good deal. If they are entering, and the main thing is, as with many health supplements, that they just don't believe they work, then the proof is a huge deal, and so by showing proof that it works, it enters the conversation that's already going on. Sometimes urgency can work if there's a real reason for urgency, or anything else from their mental shopping list, anything else from all those things I mentioned earlier that kind of meshes in with the stage that they currently are in the mental shopping list.
Okay.
2 is the things that get looked at first, and again, most people, this is the one that I just accidentally skipped to just before.
Right.
It's, that people say the headlines, but it's not always the headline. It's whatever people look at first on the page is the thing that's going to make a difference. And I mentioned eye tracking, Fred, but if you look here, if you start, this was a page where I'm just looking at the URL there. This was when we were working on SEO Mars' landing page. This was the start of an eye tracking test, but the person has just entered, the URL, and already the eye's looking around. That little dot describes the first eye movement, and we have a video of this, but I don't think I can show it now. But what you find on this video is that the person the thing the person looks at first is the thing that loads up on the page first. So it's not the headline, because often the headline isn't even the thing that loads up first, especially if it's a large page or if they're on a slow connection. So it's much more complicated than just being the headline. But typically it's what's above the fold. So if you do have a long page, then pay particular attention to what's above the fold and to what people look at first when they look at the page, which you can only really know by actually showing someone a page for a couple of seconds, get them to close their eyes and to tell you what they've looked at already, or even just even without the closing your eyes, but just to tell you what they've looked at.
Okay.
Next is the offer or offers and the calls to action. If you change, again, it should sound obvious, but if you can change what you're actually offering them or what you appear to be offering them, and the wording of the call to action, that can make a huge difference, because obviously, if you ask someone to do something different, you're going to get a different conversion rate. Then if you can change, for example, a button that says register here to get started now, that sounds, even though you're effectively getting them to do exactly the same action, then by describing something as get started now on the button rather than register here, you're changing what the call to action and what the offer sounds like. In particular, register is a good conversion killer. Register here it's even now it's surprising how often it gets used, and we find that by actually giving the benefit in the offer rather than register, which actually describes the downside of clicking on the button, then that, things like that can make a big difference.
Okay.
Next is the weakest aspects. Again, it just sounds obvious, but there's no cookie cutter. In the same way that if you take a car to a mechanic and get them to fix your car, the mechanic just doesn't apply 20 best practices for fixing cars. They actually diagnose what's wrong with your car and then fix that. Mm-hmm. It's surprising how many people will start trying to fix a landing page's conversion rate by just applying best practices, when what they really need to do is diagnose why the visitors aren't taking action at the moment and fixing those things. It sounds obvious when you say it like that, but it's incredible how few people actually do that. There's so many tools available for finding out why customers aren't taking action. There's just no excuse not to do that nowadays.
Well, like what? What tools are you referring to?
I'll describe a few. I've actually got a slide here showing how you can we've got a report that describes our favorite 15, and if you see that little green area, learning zone, And if you go there and sign up to our newsletter, one of the first things we send you is link to an article which describes the 15 top tools, in our opinion, for finding out exactly why visitors aren't converting, and then and tells you how we use those tools as well, the best places to put them and which questions to ask through them and things like that. I'll tell you, I mentioned Qualaroo before, didn't I? The customer feedback tool, but there are also ones. There's Crazy Egg, which provides click maps to show where on the page people are clicking, which is really useful because until you know where people are clicking, you really don't have a very good idea of how people are using the page. There's ClickTail, which actually shows videos of flash videos of your users scrolling and mouse movement as they're using your page, so you really can see exactly how they're navigating through the site. There are survey tools, and there's one called 4Q, which is an exit survey, so you can ask people once they leave the page, you can ask them why they didn't convert and why they, whether they what they came to the page to do, and whether they were successful, and if not, why not? What stopped them from actually taking action? And another, how many have I described? Another 11 or 12 of those things. So you really can find out exactly why people aren't converting, rather than just guessing.
Gotcha.
And just by doing that alone, it's incredible how you can completely transform a site conversion rate just by finding that out.
I'll bet.
And the final one is proof. So many sites, everything, when we capture all those reasons why visitors don't convert, proof comes up a lot. It's surprising how often the prospect, the visitors say, "Oh, the reason I didn't order was I wasn't really persuaded that this would do what it says it does." And so, one really simple tip is, you can do this in 10 seconds, is create a folder on your computer called proof, and then every time any evidence comes in whatever form, that your service is good, whether it's happy emails from customers, whether it's reviews, whether it's press clippings, whether it's any evidence, performance data, any evidence that you ever see that represents proof that your service is good, just stick it in this folder, and then when it comes to creating the landing page, you'll have a whole folder full of useful evidence that that the service is good. So weirdly, we find that until someone's got a proof folder, they just this stuff lies all over the place and they forget it exists. But the second that you create a proof folder, you've got somewhere to store it, and suddenly, when someone says, "Oh, we've been mentioned in this newspaper, and here's a good review," you can just store it in that proof folder, and you can get your hands on it easily when it comes to it.
Sounds good.
I mentioned before about outsourcing or delegating your copywriting. It's hard to find someone who's good at this, partly because it's such an incredibly valuable skill to have, that the people who are good at it, are worth so much to their employers or to their clients. Firstly, is find someone who's got a track record of getting wins, because if someone's good at copywriting and conversion, then they will have a track record of getting a lot of wins. Next, ensure that each change is split tested. So when you actually make, if you're the CEO of a company, make sure that your marketing department are carrying out split tests. If they're not, then they are, at best they're sailing without a compass. They're not going in the right direction. No marketer is experienced enough to not need split testing. No one's opinion is as good as, no one can predict the results of every split test.
Yeah, no one's clairvoyant.
No one's clairvoyant, no. And realistically, the reason is because until you know all of the visitors and you know exactly what they want, then it's very hard to know exactly what is going on in each visitor's mind to the point where you know exactly what they'll do. So split testing, there's no replacement for it. Weirdly, we find the most sophisticated marketers, by the way, are the ones who are actually quite humble because people who split test, marketers who split test, become quite humble because they know that they're right. They know that how that everything comes down to how the customers vote in the tests.
Speaking of that, maybe you're going to cover this in a bit. And correct me if if you can stop me if you are. But for the person who is watching this video right now, is Google Analytics sufficient for them to be tracking the things that they need to track in order to make the right decisions conversion-wise?
Yes, Google Analytics is good for tracking conversions. For split testing, realistically, as far as split testing goes, Google Analytics Content Experiments is good for split tests, and like I mentioned before, some of the other services are easier to set up, which is a big advantage. But yeah, it's the good thing. The good thing is the magic isn't in the testing method. It's more in knowing what to test, which is what we've been talking about on this whole session. Is just knowing what to test. The next one is ensure the person follows this process. Anyone who's good at copywriting will follow the kind of steps that we've been talking about. And so if someone's never done any of the things in this talk, then I can guarantee that they're not going to be very good at conversion. So the more someone spends time carrying out usability tests and gathering customer objections and looking into the analytics for the data, and then understanding the prospects, understanding how the salespeople sell, and is good at actually creating persuasive copy, that's a very good sign that they'll get results for you. But if the person's blind to all of this, then that should be a warning sign. And I'd say that's something to live by.
Okay.
You need someone who can sell, and the two skills, which is really the basis of this talk. The two skills are being able to sell and being able to write. Now, how do you know if someone can sell and how do you know if someone can write? A nice little shortcut with sell is to think: would you buy from them? If you are they the kind of person that you would buy from? Because people often see salespeople as being, pushy manipulators, but if the real best salespeople are the people that you would actually trust and buy from. So, would you buy from them? Are they good at persuading you to do things? And secondly, can they write? Can you understand what they write? When they write something, is it easy and enjoyable to read? Or is it painful and difficult? If you struggle to understand what they're saying in writing, then that's a sign that they're not a good writer, no matter how impressive their writing might seem. And similarly, if you enjoy reading what they write, then that's a sign that they're an extremely good writer.